Warhammer 40,000 versus Battletech. What is the difference in gameplay? That's what we're going to explore and focus on in this vlog. Now, certainly when we're comparing two different systems, two different miniature gaming systems, there's a difference in the narrative. You might prefer one narrative over the other, grimdark versus kind of lost tech giant robots. We need to put that aside also, because one of the things that we're exploring in looking at both is the narrative that it is communicating. What does that feel like? If we sit down to play a game, we've got the terrain, we've got the miniatures, we've got the mission, we've got the dice, we're ready to go. What is that experience like? How is one experience different than the others? And I'm not necessarily talking about scale or size of the battle, because certainly looking at core Warhammer 40,000, while it encourages bigger games, you can play massive games and you can play much smaller games. And likewise, Battletech, you can play a lance for mechs, or you can scale that up with mechs and air support and artillery and infantry. So it's not necessarily the scale of the game and what that represents, but the feeling. So for me, being a Warhammer 40K enthusiast and a Battletech enthusiast, the feeling that it delivers. The units in Warhammer tend to feel like wound counters in that you have a number of models on the table, and some might be infantry-based where you'll remove those miniatures. Other might be vehicle-based where it'll be able to take a certain amount of damage before it's removed. But essentially, it's kind of very on or off, 1 or 0. I've got 10 space elves. I've got 10 space marines. I've got 10 space robots. I take some wounds. I remove them. In Battletech, there's this feeling of catastrophic damage, of these giant war machines taking massive amounts of punishment and just continuing to push on or exploding dramatically. Battletech is more nuanced in that as you take damage, you start losing armor from the arms, from the legs, from the torso. Once you lose that armor, it goes into the internals, the nuts and bolts, the mechanics, the actual machinery of the mech. And that damage translates into the game to taking critical damage where you lose weapons or heat sinks, or the very machinery that moves the mech. You start taking movement penalties. Your engine gets damaged. You take heat penalties. These machines over the course of battle, now occasionally you get hit and you explode right away, but for the most part over the course of the battle, you take more and more damage. And your machines take this damage, transfer this damage, and you're constantly pushing yourself. Now, how does that play against the feeling of Warhammer 40,000? Warhammer 40,000 tends to be a little bit more streamlined with the wound counters in that we're looking at, and again, for the most part, we can play some really big games, we can play some smaller games. There's this feeling in Warhammer 40K that we're sitting down at this table, you and I, to play. And we're a small, tiny, in the grimdark, insignificant snapshot of a massive battle going on. It's like we're playing at this point in the battlefield, but this battlefield is the size of the entire planet. We're part of this tabletop glory in the moment. So it's not as nuanced where you're taking this kind of damage and really pushing things, and it's very intricate with that narrative. It plays fast. It plays I got hit and my entire squad got wiped out. It plays I took a couple of hits to my Land Raider and it explodes. It plays to where we charge in, bolt pistol, chainswords, power weapons, combat knives, grenades, and we just wipe each other out. It's made to be this kind of mass scale, very, very fast battle. It's a different feeling where how it plays compared to Battletech. That's the feeling that I primarily get. And again, pulling out and saying, well, giant robots and Battletech and Lost Tech and the narrative versus the Grimdark and the Emperor and the Primarchs. That narrative, there's good and bad points to both of them, but that's really kind of a personality, what you like to play. It's in that moment, what are you feeling? What does the game play? And I leave with this. One of the things that I try to do in every war game that I play, you and I are sitting down to play a war game, time well spent, but we're taking time out of the here and now of today, other responsibilities, school and work. So I want that experience to be as premium as possible. I'm going to do the best that I can to win. I'm going to do the best that I can to give you a good game. And personally, I'm going to do the best I can to seize tabletop glory. But I want to create that moment with you and remember this battle, right? So from that perspective, one of the things that I learned early on when I was playing wargaming, I was playing Napoleonics, I was playing DBA, we were kind of getting into historicals, and that really shaped me in the moment where we would play these historical battles, recreating battles. The terrain was what it was at that moment. The sides were what they were at the moment. The units were painted up exactly in the moment for what they were. And there were times when we'd be playing these big kind of historical war games where I would step back, and this really impressed upon me. I would step back from the table for a moment, and you're kind of there. You're in this other place. Yes, it's a game, but it's a narrative that we've immersed ourselves in, almost like a living role-playing game. And I want to feel what it's like in that moment, whatever that narrative it's trying to convey. So playing my Romans, I'm commanding the Legion. Playing Napoleonics, we're exploring that. It's like one of the few times that I played the French. And that narrative, capturing that is important. I've tried to port that over to Warhammer 40,000. I've tried to port that over to Battletech, and that's kind of how I view it, where it's, what do you get out of this game? What is the feeling that it's imparting? The rules add to it, the narrative add to it, the cool miniatures add to it, the terrain, the partner that you're playing with. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Battletech, what does that feel like to play? And Warhammer 40,000, what does that feel like to play? And I think if you can capture that feeling, or at least experience it playing a couple of games, asking and answering the question, do I want to jump into this system? Do I want to play this system? That will help you tremendously.